We know there are a lot of very difficult judgments to be made here, a balance between eliminating the risk of infection and shutting society down altogether. And that's where school closures are very contentious. Kids aren't badly affected by this virus, but of course they can spread it. So is it a greater risk to have them at school or at home in the community? What about the hit to the economy, ruining a year's education, of course losing parents from important work to be at home and care for their kids? Some countries, in particular Singapore, have been very successful at suppressing the virus while keeping schools open. And for now, that's Australia's chosen path.
And I'm telling you that as a father, I'm happy for my kids to go to school. There's only one reason your kids shouldn't be going to school, and that is if they are unwell.
But some self-appointed experts are determined to say they know better, trying to run the response through the media.
I do think that a severe shutdown is required.
Schools, if schools are not gathering of more than 100 people, what are?
Now, some journalists seem to think this is their job too, but look at this graph from a British study. The black line shows infections with no actions. The second highest line in green is what happens with schools and universities closed. Clearly, other measures such as isolation and home quarantine are much more effective. So I'm happy to go with the expert who circulated this. Peter Collignon has been on this program. He's a professor in infectious diseases at Australian National University. And he says, my interpretation of this modelling is that closing schools will be the least effective intervention to prevent deaths from coronavirus compared to other options. But it will have major social and economic costs and interfere with the best delivery of many essential services, for example, health. So an informed discussion of these issues is, of course, warranted. We've got to be able to debate them and discuss them. And decisions are going to be adjusted as we go. Certainly, nothing is locked in for the long term. But remember, they're not taken just by the Prime Minister, these decisions, but with all the premiers and chief ministers as well, and expert advice from state and national chief medical officers. Journalists, commentators and political opponents screaming in the media that they know better are not very useful. And just on that, former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd has used the crisis to offer gratuitous advice to and to try and score points about his legacy. That's pretty sad. But if you want to know how a former Prime Minister can act with dignity for the common good, have a look at this.
Hi, I'm filming this video on my last day of self-isolation in London. A very big thank you to everybody who's wished me well. I am absolutely fine and I'm looking forward to returning home to Australia, where of course I'll go into a further 14-day period of self-isolation. It's very important at a time like this to make sure we listen to and abide by all of the government's public health messages.
Well done, and safe travels to Julia Gillard.